Have you ever paused to imagine what it felt like to take the very first step of a journey in the 16th century? Not with a car waiting outside, not with a train ticket in your hand, but with nothing more than your feet, a horse perhaps, or a wooden cart standing ready. The world moved more slowly then, and so did the travelers who crossed it. Journeys began not with a rush, but with a calm acceptance that distance was measured not in minutes, but in days, even weeks. Let us walk quietly into that world and see what the roads themselves were like. Before we drift into tonight's story, make sure to subscribe so you'll never miss a gentle journey through history. The roads of the 16th century were not like the ones you know today. They were often narrow, uneven, and deeply shaped by the land around them. In some places you might find cobblestones carefully laid in towns or cities, their surfaces smoothed by countless footsteps and wheels. The sound would have been sharp and clear, the steady clop of a horse's hooves, the rumble of an iron-rimmed wheel, the softer shuffle of boots. In the countryside, however, the roads often turned to dirt paths, winding along fields and hedgerows. When the weather was dry, the dust would rise in gentle clouds, coating the hems of clothing and settling in the air like a pale veil. When it rained, those same paths could turn to mud, thick and sticky, pulling at shoes and slowing wagons to a crawl. Now, imagine you are standing on such a road at dawn. The sky is pale, the air is cool, and before you lies the path that will carry you onward. You might ask, how far could someone expect to travel in a day? The answer, in truth, depended on how they traveled. A person on foot might cover 15 or 20 miles if the weather was kind and the path smooth. On horseback, one could go farther. The horses too grew weary and needed to rest. With a wagon or cart, progress was slower still, burdened by creaking wheels and heavy loads. What mattered most was not speed, but patience. Travel was a rhythm, not a race. Each step, each turn of a wheel, was a reminder that the journey was as important as the arrival. Think of the way the road guided travelers. Some were wide enough to allow carts to pass one another. Others narrowed into lanes where only one person at a time could walk, pressed between hedges or stone walls. On hillsides, paths climbed in slow spirals, following the curve of the land. Across valleys, wooden bridges creaked over streams, their planks weathered by years of use. Travelers came to know the land beneath them, not just by maps, but by memory. The place where a road curved sharply around an oak tree, the stretch of ground that always grew muddy in winter, the stones that marked the edge of a village. But let us not think of roads only as routes of trade or duty. They were also places of sound and silence, of little moments that gave journeys their quiet character. The chirp of birds at dawn, the whisper of leaves when the wind rushed through the hedgerows, the distant sound of a cart long before it came into sight, its wheels groaning and bouncing in their wooden frames. Even the rhythm of footsteps became a companion, steady, grounding, and endlessly patient. Now, one might wonder, who built these roads? Some were ancient paths, worn smooth by centuries of use, long before the 16th century even began. Others were improved or widened by towns that relied on trade. Yet many remained nothing more than tracks across the land, shaped not by design, but by habit. People walked them, animals followed, Wheels pressed into the soil, and over time a road appeared where none had been planned. They were less about perfection and more about persistence. For the traveler, every road told a story. The cobbled street in a market town spoke of commerce and gathering, where traders rolled barrels and customers hurried with baskets in hand. The dirt path leading through farmland told of neighbors visiting one another, of shepherds guiding flocks, of farmers taking grain to the mill. Even the smallest footpath, weaving between hedges, carried its own quiet history of countless feet that had walked it before. The 16th century road was not simply a way from one place to another. It was a living thread binding together the daily lives of people across villages, towns, and cities. To walk upon it was to follow in the footsteps of countless others, to become part of an unbroken line of travelers who moved at the same slow, patient pace. As evening fell, those same roads would change their voice. The light would soften, shadows lengthen, and the air cool. The sound of travel grew quieter, too. A horse slowing its trot, a wheel settling to rest, a traveler's steps easing into the final mile before an inn or a friend's house. The road no longer pulled them forward. It guided them gently home. So when we think of travel in the 16th century, we must begin with the roads beneath their feet. They were not smooth or fast. They did not carry travelers in haste, but they were steady, familiar, and enduring. Each road was a path through, both space and time whispering with the patience of countless journeys taken long before ours. If we are to step truly into the world of 16th century travel, then we must begin where most journeys began, with the human foot. For while horses and carts had their place, the simplest and most common way to move through the century was simply to walk. But how did it feel to set out on such a walk when your only carriage was your own 2 feet? Let us imagine. You rise at dawn. The air is cool, the sky washed with pale light, and the world is quiet, except for the faint stirrings of animals and the distant toll of morning activity in a town. You place your feet on the ground, tie your shoes, gather what you need, and step forward. The journey has begun, not with wheels or sails, but with the slow, steady rhythm of your footsteps. One may wonder, how far could a person go in a day? For most, the answer was not measured in miles, but in hours. A traveler might expect to walk for 8, 10, or even 12 hours if the road allowed, resting only briefly along the way. At a steady pace, perhaps 15 or 20 miles could be covered before evening drew in. Yet speed was rarely the point. Walking was as much about patience as it was about distance. Every step carried the traveler not only closer to a destination, but deeper into the experience of the road itself. What did they wear upon their feet? Shoes in the 16th century were crafted of leather, sturdy and serviceable, though not always comfortable by our modern standards. Soles were thick to resist stones and mud, and the shape was simple, built for endurance more than style. For the wealthy, finer shoes with buckles or softer leather might ease the journey, but for the common traveler, a pair of well-worn boots was a companion as vital as any map or guide. Some carried walking sticks, carved smooth from wood, which helped steady the stride upon rough or sloping ground. And what of the sounds of walking? Imagine the shuffle of leather soles upon cobblestones, the crunch of gravel on a dry path, or the soft thud of steps in damp earth after a rain. Each road offered its own rhythm, and to the attentive traveler, these sounds were as familiar as the voices of friends. Let us pause and ask, what did a traveler carry with them on such a walk? Rarely much, for the body could only bear so much. Weight: a small bundle tied with rope or cloth, a flask of water, a pouch with bread or cheese, perhaps a cloak to ward off the chill at night. Nobles might have servants carry heavier loads, but most relied on the strength of their own backs. Each object chosen for a journey mattered, for every ounce would make itself known before the day was done. Walking brought travelers into close conversation with the land. They felt the stones beneath their soles, the warmth of sun on their shoulders, the wind pressing against them on open stretches of road. Fields unfolded slowly, hedgerows seemed to guide their steps, and hills rose patiently before them, climbed with steady breath. Unlike a horse or cart, which might pass quickly, the walker knew every bend, every dip, every uneven patch. Distance was earned with effort, and that effort created memory. And yet, walking was not only a necessity, it was also a chance to observe. The world revealed itself more fully to the walker than to any rider. Birds darting in hedges, wildflowers bending in the wind, the faint hum of bees in summer meadows. These were gifts only a slow pace could offer. Passing through a village, the walker might hear the clatter of pots in a kitchen, the laughter of children, the hammering of a blacksmith at his forge. To walk was to experience life at its truest scale, where every sense was engaged. But travel on foot was not without its challenges. Mud could cling to boots until each step felt heavy. Rain could soak cloaks through, chilling the body. In winter, frost turned the road hard and brittle beneath one's feet, while in summer, the heat could make the dust rise in clouds that stung the eyes and parched the throat. Still, the human body is resilient, and those accustomed to such journeys learned to endure. They paced themselves, rested beneath trees, drank from streams, and pressed forward. The company of others made walking easier. Groups of merchants, pilgrims, or families often traveled together, sharing conversation and easing the long hours. One might sing a soft song to pass the time, or tell stories to distract from the weary feet. Laughter could lighten even the heaviest step, while silence allowed the road itself to become the companion. Alone or in company, the walker carried not only the weight of their bundle, but the weight of the day's unfolding hours. Nightfall brought rest. A traveler on foot might stop at an inn if coin allowed, or perhaps find shelter with acquaintances. Along the way, others rested beneath the open sky, with only a cloak and the steady stars above. Feet were eased, food was shared, and the body grew heavy with sleep, ready to rise again when dawn returned. So when we think of travel in the 16th century, we must not forget the most enduring, most universal way of all, the simple act of walking. It was slow, yes. It was demanding, at times uncomfortable, but it connected people most closely to the land, to the sounds of the world around them, and to the shared human rhythm of step after step, mile after mile. If you're enjoying this quiet stroll through history, don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful stories like this. If walking was the most common way to travel, then riding upon a horse or mule was perhaps the most admired. To mount an animal in the 16th century was not only to move more swiftly, but also to feel the steady partnership between human and beast. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like in a world without cars or bicycles, to rely upon the rhythm of hooves instead? Picture it. The morning air is crisp, the road stretches ahead, and beside you waits a patient horse. Its breath curls into mist, its ears flicker at distant sounds, and its eyes regard you with quiet steadiness. You place a hand on its mane, the leather saddle creaks beneath your weight, and soon you are lifted from the earth itself. Now the journey begins not with steps, but with the gentle sway of a living companion. Horses were prized in the 16th century, yet not every person could own one. They required care, stabling, and feeding, and so they were often kept by nobles, merchants, or messengers whose duties required speed. For common travelers, mules and donkeys were more affordable companions. Stronger and steadier than horses, though slower, these animals carried heavy loads with patience, often serving traders and farmers who brought goods to markets. But let us ask, what was it like to ride such an animal for hours on end? The answer depends upon both the rider and the creature. The pace of a walk was gentle, a rocking motion that allowed the rider to look upon the land with ease. At a trot, the body bounced with each step, jolting and sometimes tiring. At a gallop, though, the world seemed to rush past in a blur of wind and sound, though such speed could not last for long. Most travelers found a steady walking pace best, covering ground without exhausting the animal. Imagine the sounds, the rhythmic clop of hooves striking stone, the softer thud upon earth, the jingling of harness buckles, the creak of leather straps. These were the music of the road for the rider, steady and calming in their repetition. What of the care of these animals? A rider in the 16th century knew that the journey could not be rushed. Horses required rest, food, and water as much as humans did. A stop at midday might mean loosening the girth of a saddle, brushing sweat from a horse's coat, or leading it to drink from a stream. Travelers learned to read the signs of fatigue, the lowered head, the slowing pace, and to respect the endurance of the animal. For a weary horse was no longer a companion of speed, but a creature in need of kindness. Clothing for the rider was also shaped by travel. Boots were sturdier, cloaks longer to shield from wind and rain while seated. In the saddle, a wide-brimmed hat might guard against the sun. In colder seasons, layers of wool kept the body warm, though the rider still felt the chill of rushing air more keenly than the walker. Yet riding was more than practical. For many, it carried a sense of pride. Nobles on horseback were seen as figures of status, their animals adorned with fine saddles, colorful cloths, and even decorated bridles. Merchants valued horses for the speed with which they could carry letters or goods across regions. Messengers prized them most of all, for a horse meant the difference between a letter delivered in days or in weeks. To own or ride one was to hold a certain measure of importance in the eyes of others. But beyond status, there was also companionship. To ride a horse was to build a quiet bond. The tug of the reins, the press of the heels, the voice of the rider, all guided the animal forward. In return, the horse gave strength, speed, and patience. Together, human and beast shaped the rhythm of the journey, neither able to complete it without the other. And what of mules and donkeys? These animals may not have been as swift, but their sure-footedness made them invaluable. They walked narrow mountain paths, carried burdens heavier than horses, and endured conditions that might have tired a finer steed. A mule's steady step could mean the safe arrival of goods to market, or the careful carrying of a traveler across rough ground, where wheels could not roll. They were not admired for beauty, perhaps, but respected for reliability. Evenings on horseback were a different experience than evenings on foot. As shadows stretched across the road, the rider felt the horse's pace slow, each hoof finding its place more carefully in the fading light. A stop at an inn meant not only food for the traveler, but also stabling for the animal. The smell of hay, the sound of horses shifting in their stalls, the low crunch of grain being eaten, these became part of the traveler's rest, a reminder that journeys were shared with another living being. So when we think of travel in the 16th century, the image of horse and rider must not be forgotten. Whether swift messenger, proud noble, or weary merchant, the bond between human and animal carried countless people across the roads of Europe and beyond. It was not the speed of the gallop that mattered most, but the steady partnership that turned miles into memories day after patient day. Not everyone in the 16th century traveled by foot or on horseback. For those who carried heavy loads, or for those of higher status who wished for greater comfort, the road was shared with carts and carriages. To see one passing along a town street or rumbling down a country lane was to witness both the creak of wood and the patience of the journey itself. Carts were the most common, drawn by horses, oxen, or mules. Their wheels were solid wood rimmed with iron, built to withstand the wear of uneven roads. They carried sacks of grain, barrels of ale, baskets of fruit, and sometimes even passengers who had no horse of their own. The pace was slow, often no faster than a steady walk, but they were strong. Farmers bringing produce to market relied upon them, as did merchants moving goods between towns. The sound of their passage was unforgettable. The low groan of axles, the rattle of loose boards, and the steady beat of hooves pulling forward. Carriages, by contrast, were for the wealthy. They were enclosed, cushioned, and often decorated with fine woodwork and bright paint. Windows allowed passengers to look out upon the road while remaining sheltered from wind, dust, or rain. Nobles and prosperous merchants used them not only for travel, but also as a display of status. To ride in a carriage was to be seen as someone of importance. But what was the ride itself like? We might imagine it as smooth, but the truth was otherwise. The roads of the 16th century were rarely even, and the wheels struck every stone and rut. Inside the carriage, passengers swayed with every turn, bounced with every hollow, and felt the roughness of the road beneath them. Cushioned soft, the ride, but they could not erase it. Travel by carriage was comfortable compared to walking in the rain, but it was never gentle by modern standards. Ox-drawn carts had their own rhythm. Strong but slow, oxen pulled great weight without complaint. Their steps were steady, their pace deliberate. Such carts were often used for journeys that mattered less for speed than for strength. Hauling timber from a forest, stone from a quarry, or heavy produce to a town. Behind them, the cart groaned and swayed, but it always moved forward, however. Gradually, horses made faster carriages possible. A team of 2 or 4 could pull a lighter vehicle across longer distances, covering far more ground than an ox could manage in a day. Yet horses too needed rest, food, and water, and so carriage Journeys were broken by pauses at inns or roadside stables. Travelers might descend, stretch their legs, and listen to the soft sounds of harness buckles loosened, horses snorting as they were led to drink. One might ask, who traveled in carriages? Nobles on journeys between estates, wealthy families, moving between town and countryside. Diplomats and officials who carried letters or decrees. For these people, the carriage was not just transport. It was protection from the dust, rain, and sun that made walking so wearying. Inside, they might sit in relative ease, speaking with companions or looking out at the world as it passed slowly by. Still, the carriage was bound to the same pace as the road allowed. A rut could break a wheel. Mud could mire the horses to their knees. A hill might demand the passengers climb down to lighten the load. Even for the rich, travel was never without its difficulties. The road reminded all travelers, whether peasant or noble, that progress came at the pace of the land itself. Imagine, for a moment, standing at the side of a 16th century road as a carriage passes. The wheels clatter against the stones. The horses breathe heavily, their manes flicking with sweat. The driver sits high upon the front, reins in hand, guiding the team with practiced ease. Inside, behind wooden panels and glass windows, a family sits in relative quiet, shielded from the dust that swirls around the wheels. The contrast is clear. Within, a world of calm. Without, the endless labor of hooves and wood. And yet, for all their grandeur, carriages were still rare compared to the sight of simple carts. A farmer with a cart piled high with hay, a merchant's wagon loaded with barrels, a villager riding upon a creaking bench while the wheels turned beneath him. These were the daily, ordinary sights. They moved slowly along the same roads as walkers, raising dust in summer, cutting grooves in mud after rain. They were part of the rhythm of travel, as much a part of the 16th century as the footstep or the horse's stride. So when we think of travel in this age, we must imagine not only the lone walker or the rider upon a horse, but also the steady carts and carriages that filled the roads with sound and motion. Some carried goods, others carried people, all bound by the same steady pace of hooves and wheels. They were not swift, nor were they silent, but they carried lives forward mile by mile with patience and persistence until at last the road delivered them to their journey's end. Not every traveler in the 16th century kept to the roads. Across much of Europe, rivers offered another path, one that was slower, quieter, and often easier than trudging through mud or rattling over stones. To journey by water was to let the current itself become the guide. Imagine the scene at dawn. Mist hangs low above a wide river, soft and silver in the pale light. A flat-bottomed boat waits at the bank, its wood damp from the night air. The water laps gently against its side. A ferryman, broad-shouldered from years at the oar, steadies the vessel as passengers step aboard. With a push from a long pole, the boat drifts free of the bank, and the journey begins not on a road of earth or stone, but on a road of water. River travel in the 16th century was practical. Roads could be poor, muddy, or blocked, but rivers always flowed. A boat could carry far more than any cart: barrels of wine, sacks of grain, timber, cloth, pottery. Merchants favored river routes for the sheer weight they could move at once. A single barge might hold what would take dozens of wagons to carry. For passengers, too, river travel was often easier on the body. Instead of weary feet or jolting wheels, there was only the steady motion of water beneath the hull. Yet one might ask, what did it feel like to spend hours upon such a journey? The kun answer is found in the rhythm. The oars dipped and rose, splashing quietly. Water gurgled against the bow. The boat rocked gently from side to side, never hurried, never still. Passengers sat upon benches, wrapped in cloaks against the cool air, their bundles at their feet. Conversation was hushed, as though voices softened to match the quiet of the river itself. Ferries were common across Europe, linking towns separated by wide streams. For a small fee, a ferryman carried travelers, animals, and carts across. The experience was brief but memorable. The tilt of the boat under a cart's weight, the careful balance of horses stepping aboard, the relief as the opposite bank drew near. For those who lived by rivers, the ferry was part of daily life, as ordinary as a road bridge is to us today. Longer journeys required larger boats. Some were barges, pulled by horses, walking along the riverbank, with ropes fastened to the mast. The sight was slow but steady, the animal trudging on the path, the boat gliding forward in silence. Others relied on sails when the wind permitted, though river breezes were not always reliable. Still, whether pulled, rowed, or pushed by pole, the barge was a floating cart, its progress measured not in hours but in days. For those who traveled, the river offered more than transport. It offered scenery. Villages appeared on the banks, their cottages reflected in the water. Mills turned slowly as the current powered their wheels. Fishermen stood knee-deep with nets, pausing to glance at the passing boat. Children waved from the shallows, their voices faint across the water. From the deck, the traveler saw a world unfold at the pace of the river itself. But rivers carried challenges, too. In spring, floods swelled their banks, turning calm channels into wide torrents. In winter, ice formed at the edges, cracking under oars. Sandbars caught the hull when waters ran low. The ferryman's skill or the boatman's knowledge of channels and depths mattered as much as the strength of the oars. A wrong turn could mean hours lost, a grounding in the mud, or worse, a broken hull. Evening upon the river brought a calm of its own. The sun lowered, its reflection shimmering gold upon the ripples. Boats tied to wooden posts, ropes creaking. As they tightened, travelers disembarked at inns along the water, their legs unsteady after a day of drifting. For those who remained aboard, sleep came to the sound of water brushing the hull, a lullaby as old as the river itself. So when we think of travel in the 16th century, we must picture not only dusty roads and weary feet, but also the quiet lanes of water. The river was both path and companion, carrying goods, carrying people, carrying stories from one town to the next. It was slower than a gallop, steadier than a cart, but in its calm flow it offered something else. A journey where the traveler could sit, breathe, and watch the world pass gently by. If rivers were the quiet paths of the 16th century, then the seas were its vast highways. To step aboard a ship was to embrace both promise and uncertainty. Journeys by water could connect towns, kingdoms, and even continents, but they also carried travelers into a world where the horizon stretched endlessly and the land disappeared from sight. Imagine standing at the edge of a busy harbor. Wooden masts rise like a forest. Ropes creak in the wind, gulls cry overhead. Sailors move briskly across decks, hauling lines, stowing barrels, and shouting instructions. The smell of salt mingles with the sharp tang of tar and the faint sweetness of spices waiting to be loaded. For a traveler, the harbor is the threshold between the solid ground of the familiar and the shifting expanse of the unknown. What sort of vessels carried people in the 16th century? Coastal journeys often used smaller boats, stout, wide-bottomed craft that hugged the shoreline, carrying fish, cargo, and passengers between nearby ports. Longer voyages required larger ships, carracks, galleons, and merchant vessels with high wooden sides, billowing sails, and holds deep enough to carry both goods and travelers. Some were cramped, with passengers squeezed among barrels and crates. Others, serving nobles or wealthy merchants, offered cabins with bunks, tables, and even small windows opening onto the endless water. One might ask, what was it like to sail? Aboard such a ship, the first thing was motion. Even in calm seas, the deck swayed gently, rocking with the steady rhythm of the waves. In rougher waters, that rhythm grew more insistent, pitching passengers from side to side. To the seasoned sailor, this movement was ordinary. To the unaccustomed traveler, it could feel like the ground itself refused to stay still. The sounds of a voyage were constant companions, the snap of canvas as the wind filled the sails, the low groan of timber beams as the hull flexed against the water, the slap of waves against the side, sometimes gentle, sometimes sharp. At night, the creak of ropes and the occasional call of the watchman echoed through the dark, blending with the endless hush of the sea. Life aboard ship was ordered by necessity. Food was plain: salted meat, hard biscuits, dried beans, and water stored in barrels. Fresh supplies were taken on at ports whenever possible, but on long voyages meals were simple, designed to last. Sleeping quarters were narrow and crowded, with hammocks strung close together or bunks built into the walls. Privacy was rare, yet travelers found ways to pass the hours, talking, singing, mending clothes, or simply staring at the horizon. For those unaccustomed to the sea, the journey was as much an experience of the senses as of distance. The wind carried a constant chill. Salt clung to hair and clothes. The deck rolled beneath their feet until walking became a careful art of balance. But there was beauty, too. Sunlight glittering across waves like countless mirrors. Dolphins or porpoises leaping beside the bow. Stars at night shining sharper and brighter than ever seen from land. A reflection scattered across the dark water. And what of the dangers? Storms were feared, of course, with winds that could tear sails and waves that tossed ships like toys. But even in calmer weather, delays were common. A ship might drift for days in poor winds, sails hanging limp, the sea a glassy plain stretching in every direction. Patience was not a choice, but a necessity. Arrivals, when they came, brought relief and wonder. The cry of land echoed across the deck. Travelers crowded the rails to glimpse the dark outline of shore, the towers of a distant town, or the green slopes of a new coastline. The smell of earth and grass replaced the salt, and the steady deck once again gave way to solid ground. For some, it was the end of a short crossing. For others, it was the conclusion of weeks upon the open sea. Sea voyages in the 16th century were not swift, nor were they comfortable by modern standards. Yet, they were vital. They carried merchants with their goods, fishermen with their catch, envoys with their messages, and families seeking new homes. They connected distant worlds, making oceans into bridges rather than barriers. So when we picture travel in this century, we must not forget the sea. To ride the waves was to embrace uncertainty, but also to experience the world from a new perspective. The horizon wide, the air sharp with salt, the deck swaying beneath one's feet, and the endless waters carrying travelers steadily toward distant shores. Let's pause for just a moment, and if you haven't already, subscribe to join us for more calm stories. Every journey, no matter how short or long, required pauses. In the 16th century, travelers could not move endlessly, from dawn to dusk, without rest. Roads grew rough, weather shifted, and bodies grew weary. Inns and rest stops became the gentle anchors of travel, offering food, shelter, and comfort when the road demanded patience. Imagine walking along a quiet road as evening falls. The sun lowers toward the horizon, painting the sky with soft colors. Ahead, a wooden sign swings above a doorway, the emblem of an inn. The sight brings relief. Inside there will be warmth, a place to sit, and perhaps a meal to ease hunger. Inns varied in size and comfort. In larger towns, some were lively. Places with stables for animals, kitchens filled with the scent of cooking, and rooms with beds lined in straw. In smaller villages, an inn might be no more than a simple room with a bench by the fire. Yet even the humblest of shelters was a welcome sight to a tired traveler. The moment of arrival was always full of small comforts. Boots were pulled off, cloaks hung to dry, and travelers eased themselves onto benches by the fire. The glow of flames softened the room, while the low hum of voices carried stories of the road. Merchants, farmers, and wanderers sat side by side, sharing news, laughter, and the quiet relief of rest. Meals were plain but filling. A bowl of warm pottage made from grains, beans, and vegetables, perhaps thickened with bits of meat when available, was a common dish. Bread, cheese, or dried fruit often accompanied it. To drink, inns might offer fresh water drawn from a well, a jug of milk, or a simple herbal infusion made by steeping leaves and flowers in hot water. These drinks, soothing and gentle, warmed the body after a day in the wind and rain. Sleeping. Arrangements varied with coin. Those who could afford it rented a small chamber with a wooden bedstead and a straw mattress. Others slept in shared rooms where travelers lay close together on pallets or benches. In poorer inns, one might rest near the fire itself, wrapped in a cloak. Privacy was rare, but the gift of sleep outweighed such concerns. And then there were the stables. For travelers with horses or mules, care for the animal came first. Stable boys took the reins, guiding the animals to hay and water. The smell of straw and the sound of hooves shifting on wooden floors filled the air. A weary horse might be brushed and covered with a blanket, its work for the day done. Only once their companions were cared for did travelers truly rest. Not all rests took place in inns. Along quieter stretches of road, travelers often paused where they could. A shady grove in midday offered a place to sit, unwrap bread and cheese, and drink from a flask of cool water. A farmhouse might open its door to a polite knock, giving shelter in exchange for coin or help with chores. Sometimes a traveler slept under the open sky, using their cloak as a blanket and listening to the wind in the trees until morning. What made these pauses memorable was not the comfort of the bed or the richness of the food, but the people, the kindness of a host offering a seat by the fire, the chatter of strangers exchanging news of distant towns, the feeling of belonging to a greater company of travelers who, for one night, shared the same roof. As night deepened, the noise of the inn soft. The fire sank to embers, voices fell quiet, and footsteps grew still. Outside, the wind moved gently against the shutters. Within, travelers rested, their bodies eased by warmth, their minds calmed by the pause in the journey. The inn was not their destination, but it gave them the strength to continue toward it. So when we picture travel in the 16th century, we must not imagine only the long miles on foot, horseback, or cart. We must also picture the glow of a hearth in a country inn, the quiet sharing of bread and broth, and the peace of a straw bed after a day on the road. Travel was not just about motion. It was also about the stillness found in the pauses, the gentle rest that made the next morning's steps possible. Every journey in the 16th century carried with it a certain uncertainty. Roads were not always clear, rivers not always calm, and the sea not always gentle. Travelers accepted that delays were part of the road, a broken wheel, a swollen stream, or a storm overhead could add hours, even days, to their progress. These difficulties were not dramatic battles or crises, but the quiet obstacles of daily life and a slower world. Picture a dirt road after days of rain. The path is thick with mud, ruts deepened by the wheels of passing carts. Boots sink horses. Strain and wagons tilt dangerously as they creak forward. Progress slows to a crawl, and travelers must accept that today will not take them as far as they hoped. Patience is the only answer, for the road cannot be hurried. In summer, dust posed its own challenge. Dry earth rose with every step or hoof beat, clouding the air, coating clothes and hair, stinging eyes and throats. A line of carts moving down such a road created a haze that lingered long after they had passed. For the walker at the back, the journey became one of enduring grit and dryness until evening brought cool air and clearer skies. Weather shaped every journey. Rain turned rivers into torrents that no ferry could cross until the waters fell. Winter froze the ground hard, making travel difficult and tiring. Snow blocked roads altogether, leaving some villages cut off for weeks. Even fog was a delay, thick and heavy. It forced travelers to slow, unsure of the path ahead, straining to see the road only a few steps at a time. And then there were the matters of the road itself. A wheel might break on a sharp stone, the iron rim bending, the cart leaning uselessly to one side. Axles split, harnesses snapped, and ropes gave way. Repair meant stopping, finding a craftsman in the next town, or waiting until someone could lend a hand. Every traveler knew that the road was as much about endurance as it was about motion. Animals, too, had their limits. A horse might stumble or grow lame, its leg weary from too many miles. Mules, though stronger, could refuse to move when overloaded. Caring for them was essential, for without them goods and people could not continue. A pause to let an animal rest was not wasted time, but necessary patience, woven into the fabric of travel. Delays could also come from the sheer slowness of the journey itself. A hill that looked short from a distance stretched into a long, tiring climb. A bridge crowded with carts forced travelers to wait their turn. Markets and fairs drew so many people into towns that roads became choked, each step slower than the last. Travelers might sigh, but they understood that the road belonged to all who used it. One might ask, did travelers fear these delays? Not. Often, they were expected, part of the rhythm of the road. A wise traveler left early, knowing the day would bring surprises. A storm might add 3 days to a journey. A broken cart might leave them stranded until help arrived. Such things were accepted as naturally as sunrise and sunset. Yet there was also a quiet beauty in these pauses. Waiting beside a swollen river gave time to watch the current flow, carrying branches and leaves swiftly downstream. Resting on a hillside after a broken harness allowed the traveler to look back at the view below. Villages, fields, and forests stretching far into the distance. Even delays carried their moments of stillness, reminders that time on the road was never wasted, even when progress slowed. So when we imagine travel in the 16th century, we must not picture only smooth journeys. We must also picture the mud that clung to boots, the dust that clouded the air, the creak of broken wheels, and the long hours of waiting for storms to pass. These were not disasters, but gentle reminders that the road belonged to the pace of the world, not the wishes of the traveler. And in accepting those delays, travelers found patience, resilience, and sometimes a quiet appreciation of the world around them. The roads, rivers, and seas of the 16th century were not empty paths. They were filled with people, each traveling for their own reasons, each shaping the journey in their own way. To walk along a road in that century was to find yourself among a varied company, some humble, some wealthy, all bound by the shared experience of moving from one place to another. The merchants were perhaps the most familiar travelers. Laden with goods, they moved steadily from town to town, their carts filled with barrels of ale, sacks of grain, bolts of cloth, or baskets of fruit. Some led mules packed with wares, others walked beside wagons, calling greetings to villagers as they passed. For them, the road was livelihood, the journey as important as the destination. They measured miles not by beauty, but by trade, where goods would sell, where profit could be made, and where markets opened their gates to eager customers. Yet even merchants, with their careful eyes on coin and cargo, felt the slow rhythm of travel, stopping at inns, sharing meals with strangers, and joining in the conversations that made roads into threads of human connection. Then there were the travelers of status, nobles, officials, or wealthy families. They often rode in carriages, cushioned against the bumps of the road, or on well-groomed horses adorned with decorated saddles. Their clothing marked them out, rich fabrics and fine cloaks catching the light as they passed. Yet despite their comfort, they too were slowed by the same mud, the same ruts, the same weather as the humblest walker. Wealth might ease the body, but it could not change the pace of the world around them. When their wheels broke, they too waited. When the river swelled, they too paused at the banks. The road made all travelers equal in patience. One might also meet wanderers, men and women with little but a bundle tied at the end of a stick, moving from village to village in search of work, kin, or new beginnings. Their pace was slow, their possessions few, but they carried with them stories, news, and the memory of the places they had passed through. To share a fire with such a traveler was to hear 100 tales of towns and markets, of kind hosts, and difficult roads. Not to be forgotten were groups who traveled together, bands of tradesmen, apprentices journeying to new masters, or families moving between relatives. The road was safer and livelier in company, and songs or chatter often lightened the miles. A child's laughter at the roadside, a group of young men joking as they walked, or a line of farmers guiding oxen and carts. All these sounds and sights filled the 16th century traveler's view. What was striking about these travelers was not their differences, but their sameness. All carried food and water in small bundles. All watched the weather with care, adjusting their pace to sun, wind, or rain. All knew the relief of an inn's fire after a cold day, or the comfort of sitting beneath a tree with bread and cheese in hand. Whether wealthy or poor, noble or tradesman, every traveler felt the long hours of the road and the quiet gratitude of rest. Even at sea, the pattern held true. A noble family in a cabin with windows still felt the sway of the deck beneath them, just as the common sailor in the hold did. On rivers, a merchant's barge pulled by horses shared the same current as a small boat filled with passengers. Travel in the 16th century was a reminder that while reasons for journeys might differ, the experience of moving across land and water was something shared by all. So when we imagine the travelers of this time, let us picture them not as isolated figures, but as threads in a larger tapestry. Merchants with their goods, nobles with their carriages, wanderers with their bundles, families with their children, all moving along the same roads, resting at the same inns, crossing the same rivers. Each step, each wheel, each oar-stroke carried them forward, side by side, joined by the patient rhythm of travel. If there is one truth that defined travel in the 16th century, it was rhythm. Journeys did not unfold in haste, but in measured steps, steady hoofbeats, and the creak of wooden wheels. Roads, rivers, and seas all moved at their own pace, and travelers learned to follow, not fight, that rhythm. A day on the road began early. The first light of dawn stirred travelers from their rest, whether in an inn's shared room or beneath a simple cloak in the open air. Cloaks were gathered, bundles tied, boots pulled on, and soon the first footsteps or hoofbeats carried them out into the cool morning. The air was still, fields damp with dew, and the world seemed quiet, as though waiting for the day's journey to begin. By mid-morning the rhythm was set. For walkers it was the steady fall of boots upon cobbles or dirt, each mile earned by patient effort. For riders it was the rocking gait of the horse, hooves striking the ground with calm regularity. For those in carts it was the groan of axles, the jolt of wheels over stones, and the reassuring plod of oxen or horses pulling forward. Even on rivers, the sound of oars dipping in unison or ropes tightening as horses pulled barges kept the pace steady. Meals became part of this rhythm. A pause at midday brought out bread, cheese, or dried meat from bundles. Travelers rested beneath trees, beside streams, or at the roadside, watching the world pass as they ate. Animals, too, were given water and feed, for their strength was as important as their masters. These pauses refreshed the body and prepared both human and beast for the hours that followed. Afternoons carried the weight of distance. The sun was higher, the body more weary, and the journey more silent. Words grew fewer, steps slower, and travelers often turned inward, watching the land pass without much thought. The road offered little variety. Another field, another hedge, another slow climb. But in this sameness lay a kind of calm. The journey was not only about reaching the destination, but about dwelling in the steady pace of movement itself. Evening was the most welcome part of the rhythm. As light softened, the sight of a village, an inn, or a familiar landmark brought relief. Wheels slowed, reins loosened, footsteps quickened with anticipation of rest. Inside an inn, firelight and food offered comfort. In the open, a dry patch of ground and a shared blanket gave enough. Travelers lay down with tired limbs, the sounds of the day fading, the road behind them, and another stretch ahead when dawn returned. This rhythm did more than carry people from one place to another. It shaped their understanding of time. Journeys were not measured by the hour, as they are today, but by the day, the week, the season. A walk from one town to the next might take a day. A carriage journey across a region might take 3 or 4. A river barge could drift for weeks before reaching its destination. Travel was slow, but in its slowness it offered something we rarely know now, the chance to move in step with the land and the world around it. And perhaps that is the lasting truth of travel in the 16th century. It was not defined by speed nor by comfort, but by endurance, patience, and the acceptance of the road's pace. Whether one walked with boots worn thin, rode upon a mule, or sat within a cushioned carriage, the rhythm was the same, steady, deliberate, and shaped by the world itself. So when we imagine travel in that century, let us not only think of destinations, but of the journey as it was lived. The early mornings filled with mist, the long afternoons marked by silence, the evenings soft by firelight. The rhythm of the journey was the true companion of every traveler, a patient, steady beat that carried them mile by mile, until at last they arrived